Network to the world. Subscribe now to the Hot 97 YouTube channel. It's Ebro in the Morning with Laura Stiles and Rosenberg.
Hi, it's Ebro in the Morning. Laura Stiles, Rosenberg, our guest today.
Reverend Al Sharpton, how you doing?
Well, you thought I forgot your name?
I'm just checking, you know.
So this weekend, March on Washington. You're
Yes.
taking it to the streets, National Action Network, along with House representatives, senators, and a lot of other people,
Right.
taking it to D.C. Why?
Well, Martin Luther King III and I are very concerned about the fact that this week the House of Representatives passed the John Lewis Voting Advancement Act.
That was just like yesterday, right?
Yeah, day before yesterday. And but now it goes to the Senate. And the Senate, if you remember, they voted against Senate Bill 1 on voting. They'll do the same thing because you don't have 10 Republicans to make it to the
Because it's got to be a
votes.
60-40, and right now
That's
things
right.
are 50-50 with if Kamala votes, it becomes 51-50, but you need a 60-40.
And you need a carve-out to go around that, exactly what you just said, the 60-40, which is the filibuster. So we're marching on the anniversary of Martin's father's I Have a Dream speech.
That's right.
To say we demand that you go with the carve-out Democrats. We met with Manchin, we met with Pelosi, we met with Schumer, and we expect thousands of people. We have free buses coming from all over New York, Connecticut, everywhere, to go down. We're marching, not this time at Lincoln Memorial, we're going to the Capitol. We're going to meet at McPherson Plaza at 8 in the morning, 10 o'clock the march starts, 11:30 the program starts. All the members of the Congressional Black Caucus that are in town are coming. Heads of the NAACP Urban League, many of our young activists, our student leaders in National Action Network, because they are changing the voting laws all over the country.
Something like 30 states have tried to.
42 to be
42,
exact.
sorry, okay.
And in Georgia, Texas, they've already changed. Only a federal law, and the John Lewis Voting Advancement Act would be that law, would stop that because it negates any state law because federal law supersedes. So we need people to come out even as late as a day and say, call National Action Network at 1-877-626-4651 or go online, www.nationalactionnetwork.net. You can register for a free bus. We'll bring you down there and back. Or if you're driving or flying, you can get the information there where to meet us in the morning, where the march is, and where the rally is.
So for context, going back to the original March on Washington, a lot is made of the I Have a Dream speech, right? And, you know, one of the almost marketing videos for America and inclusivity and, you know, all those things is that segment of the speech that is the I Have a Dream, which was really a freestyle from, you know what I'm saying? Martin was kicking a freestyle.
That's exactly right.
But the main components of the speech, before he got to that piece of the I Have a Dream, dealt with a lot of the issues that we still have today.
If you look at the meat of the speech, and you're right, he dealt with economic depravity, he dealt with voting, he dealt with policing. He talked about police brutality.
Right.
And it was funny because Wyatt T. Walker, who was his executive director at the time, who was the first chairman of the board of National Action Network when I started it, he was a generation ahead of me. I grew up learning from Wyatt T. Walker and Jesse Jackson, and they were like 15, 20 years older than me. And Wyatt told me that when Dr. King was speaking, the content was so heavy that the crowd had started getting quiet. And Mahalia Jackson, the gospel singer, was standing behind him, said, "You better go get that dream, Martin." And that's when he started freelance because he had done I Have a Dream as his climax to speeches on the road. That's where I Have a Dream comes from.
Got it.
People think the whole speech was I Have a Dream. It was heavy with a lot of the policies, policing, economic inequality, and how do we deal with the question of voting that we're still dealing with today.
So I often see, Martin Luther King Jr. III, Bernice King, correcting people, mostly racists and conservatives and people who like to, almost pervert what MLK was about. I see them on social media checking people often.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear from you as someone who was there and growing up at that time. How does it feel you still doing the work today? How does it feel when you see MLK taken out of context.
It's insulting. It's offensive. And it also makes me want to say to people, don't you remember that they despised Dr. King? You know, I was 13 years old when King got killed, and I was already of what they were doing. They were doing. We were controversial.
Right.
We against the war in Vietnam. People shunned us. Even some black churches didn't want us in there because they said y'all against Lyndon Johnson and all of that.
And they were happy with the Civil Rights Bill. They wanted everything to be smooth.
Right. And overnight, they were the ones having the Martin Luther King memorials when they wouldn't let King in their church 2 days before. But I think that is why some of us that have now gotten older, that was there young, say we've got to keep the torch going because we know what it really was because we were part of it. I didn't read about it. I was there. Mrs. King, that's why Martin and I worked so closely together. We grew up in the movement together. And I think that we have the responsibility to change the narrative back to what Dr. King was really about.
Do you, when you're going into a march like this, I'm sure a lot's going to be made of the fact that we're having an uptick in coronavirus cases and all of that. So I'm sure you guys are all prepared with precautions and masks and safety. All of the protocols will be in place.
Absolutely. We are providing, everyone gets on the bus. First of all, we're taking their temperature. Second of all, you have to wear a mask. We're distancing them. Everyone at the rally, the same thing. If you remember last August 28th, we had the George Floyd March. We had 200,000 people, but we distanced them. We took temperatures right there before they entered the ground, and we made everyone wear masks. There was no super spreading. We are not going to be fighting for our rights at the risk of our lives.
Right. And so you're prepared for the right to try to fry you.
They're
like
going
they
to fry
always do.
always, even though they have Trump rallies and it's all right.
That's right.
And with no mask. But we are prepared for them. But more importantly, we're prepared to do what is the precautions we need to preserve our lives.
Now we learned that Jesse Jackson and his wife had been hospitalized. Do you have an update? Do we know any information?
I talked to Reverend Jackson night before last in the hospital. He's resting. He's reacting well to the medicine. His wife as well. He was vaccinated, but he was found positive. She was found positive, and we continue to pray for them. The real concern we have is he was already diagnosed with Parkinson's, as you know, a couple of years ago. So he had pre-existing condition, and he'll be 80 years old in October. But he's done a tremendous amount of work for this country and has been a major influence on me, so I stay in touch with him and his sons every day.
What do you tell people, because I'm sure it comes up at National Action Network meetings, in the communities that you go to, whether you're in Harlem, wherever, where you have, in our communities, there's not enough people getting vaccinated. There's not enough people who understand science, not enough people wearing masks like we are. And then we have the pre-existing conditions that run rampant in our community with heart disease and diabetes and, hypertension and obesity and all these things. What is the conversation that Al Sharpton is having right now with the community?
My conversation is that clearly when you see over 600,000 people die, this is not a conspiracy to get black folks. You would not have that amount of people dying just to try to get us. And the distortion of the conspiracy theorists, when they bring up Tuskegee,
they don't even understand. That was not giving people the medicine.
That was not giving them the penicillin, not giving it to them. So they don't even have the history straight. We must get vaccinated. Will there be some breakthroughs? The percentage is very low, but the percentage of those that are therefore immune from it, not immune, but have less risk and protected from it is much higher. We cannot, at one hand, say to the government, make sure you give equal access to blacks and browns, and then blacks and browns won't take it. And I meet these people that say, well, Reb Al, I got the right to choose whether I want to do it or not. You do have that right. I fight for civil rights every day of my life. But you don't have the right to give me a risk of infection. Right. So where do my rights come in? Right. So you can say, I'm not doing it, but if your job mandates it, they've got the right to test you often, or they have the right to get rid of you because you don't have the right to come in and infect everybody else. Your rights stop when it infringes on other people's rights.
So I'm sure you're going to be hearing a lot about that, right? Because we are approaching the moment now where jobs, now that the Pfizer vax is FDA approved,
right?
You got, I saw I think it's the Sergeants Benevolence Association wants to sue the city for mandating the NYPD have to get it. The federal government and the military is going to have, that's mandated. You know, you go to the military, they don't ask you no question. They don't care what you're talking about. You're getting all these vaccines, and wherever you get deployed to, you got to get the vaccines that make sense for that area too. But I'm sure people are going to start throwing around that their civil rights are being violated.
Yeah.
You as somebody that has worked on civil rights, you just kind of articulated it, but are you prepared to start digging into this?
Oh, yeah. I'm not only prepared, we already in National Action Network have a program that we're working on that and saying whose rights. I mean, you have the right to do what you want to yourself, but you don't have the right to do that where you are infringing upon the rights of others. So you had the right to walk in the studio and say, I'm not going to vaccinate, I'm not going to wear a mask. You don't have the right to possibly threaten or put the lives in the studio at risk. And I think that's the pushback. And people, and it's not even rational. If people are saying, I have the right to die, then I mean, why are you even fighting for that? What about fighting for the right to live? And if vaccinations have been scientifically proven to protect you, then what is your beef? I think that some of us just are contrarians. And yes, we have reasons not to trust government, but we also have reasons to remember this vaccine started with a black woman that was part of the team. Mm-hmm. I do not believe that
Kizzy, shout to Kizzy.
Kizzy and them would sit there and conspire how we going to wipe out all these people. I just don't believe that.
That was the first time I've heard the phrase Kizzy and them, which, by the way, I want to run with, Reverend Al.
Kizzy and them over there.
Now, Reverend Al, I got to ask you about another tough issue these days, and that's what's going on in Afghanistan. A lot of disappointment around Joe Biden's not only handling of it and the decisions that were made to pull out, but sort of the tone that he's had about it, too. He's almost kind of had an indignant, nasty tone about it. What are your thoughts on the last couple of weeks for the Biden administration?
I thought first of all, it was a 20-year war that they're pulling out that went through 4 presidents. Biden inherited a bad hand, but he handled it badly. I think that there should have been better intel. When we saw the fact that in 20 years we were supposed to be building the Afghan forces on the ground so they could govern and protect themselves. And then when the day of reckoning comes, they almost were ushers rather than armies. They ushered in the Taliban and let them take over.
They left. They ran out.
Absolutely. And some of them had sold their weapons to them. The intel should have told them that. And I think Biden's reaction was too defensive, as you said, almost getting – he was defensive. Rather than just be transparent and say, we got bad intel, and therefore we operated wrong. Now, how do we correct this? I think the last day or so they're trying to do that. But the original bump, I think, was handled wrong. The fact that they came out was not his fault. How they came out lays at his door, no question about it.
Well, and then it's coming out that April, May of this year, there were warnings from the embassy that Americans needed to leave.
They've come with some evidence of that now,
right?
Which meant that they knew that then.
Well, but then the Afghanistan administration, the people were asking America to not leave en masse because then everybody would start to get afraid in the transition. Then when it was time to pack up and leave, the Afghan administration bounced anyway. Right. So, it's what do they call that? I think it's called a clusterfuck, if you will.
I was going to say, FUBAR? It's one of those things. And now we're in a spot where we're basically saying we need more time to get people out, and the Taliban saying no, and the United States is adhering to that.
Right.
And I'm no hawk, Reverend Al, but I mean, sometimes the U.S. can't let the ragtag Taliban say, no, you can't.
I mean, how ragtag are they? They took the whole country in a matter of days. Are they really ragtag?
Well, no. They're ragtag relative to what we're supposed to be.
Yeah, but they're not ragtag in their homeland. We are all of that in our minds here.
Right.
But you're at their mercy there, and that's the problem.
I think today they said there's 1,500 Americans left.
Right.
Last night, they said
That's not including the Afghan friends
right.
that helped.
That's just Americans.
Right, that's just
American. Then last night, anybody that was on their way to the airport or at the airport doors was told to go home because they started to get concerned about what was going on at the airport.
Right.
So these next 48 hours leading into Tuesday, which Tuesday is the 31st, I believe.
Right.
Are really like, where it's going to either get nasty or we're going to get people up out of it.
Exactly. No, I think that the proof is going to be in the pudding on the 30th and 31st. That's where the rubber's going to meet the road.
Speaking of presidents, Barack Obama. Were you at his birth? Did you get the invite to the birthday?
Yeah, I was there. It was funny. I was invited, then disinvited, then invited back. They called back and said the president wants you to come. In fact, I did the invocation to start the evening off.
Oh, nice. So what would it feel like there? Because for us, pedestrian folk who don't get the Martha's Vineyard invite, and you know what I'm saying, Barack Obama ain't sending. It sounded like leading into it, it was a lot of chaos, and maybe even at the event, it was maybe not.
No, it was it was maybe 200 people, social distance. It was a very nice time. I mean, the president, making 60 years old, he was relaxed. There was not a lot of anything other than people dancing and having fun. D Nice was playing the music. There was a short program. I did an invocation. Then they had Common and Erykah Badu and others perform. And the president thanked everybody in his family. It was a very dignified thing. The right wing went crazy because it's Obama.
Right.
But believe me, he always operated with superior dignity, and it was no different.
So did y'all have, was it like a vaxxed event? Was it COVID? Like,
oh, no, you had to present before you came. You had to send in your vaccination papers and that you had tested in the last 48 hours. All that was straight before you got there.
So it wasn't no show up and deal with it at the...
Oh, no. You had all of these things had to be in writing from medical authorities before you ever got on the ground.
And the event was outdoors, right?
It was, the whole thing was outdoors. That's
so
correct.
I just never understood what the story was. I'm like, clearly it's going to be a vaccinated event. Clearly people are going to be tested, and it's outdoors. Yet because it's Obama, they turned it into a super spreader event.
Exactly. And you contrast that with Donald Trump, who's in Alabama and other places. Inside, no masks. So, I mean, Obama, we never went inside. It was at his house. We never saw the inside of the house. It was all outside. And you had to have, if you did not have your vaccination papers in 48 hours in advance, you could not come. So they knew everybody in there was vaccinated, and you still had to wear a mask.
When did you and Obama get cool? Like, because I remember distinctly you, Cornel West, maybe even Michael Eric Dyson was having y'all got into a whole dust-up amongst
when he
y'all.
was running in 07 going into 08, we had started jumping on him. We wanted him to take certain positions. I was concerned about police brutality. Sean Bell had gotten killed in New York by police at the time. He and I met. You might remember we had dinner at Sylvia's, and they had press everywhere.
Right. Y'all took the photos and all that.
And he and I at that dinner agreed that he said, look, you're a civil rights leader. I am not. I'm a politician. He said, you're supposed to push me, and I am supposed to try to get things done. And we started understanding each other's roles. Right. And that's what he went ahead and won. I supported him. And everybody thought I was going to support Hillary Clinton because she was the senator from New York. I went ahead and supported him. And Cornell and him kept fighting. Dyson sort of went my way. But for 8 years, I had total access to him. We dealt with Trayvon Martin. We dealt with Michael Brown in Ferguson. We dealt with Eric Garner. All of the issues, he would call me direct. And we were able to build a respectful relationship because he understood my role and I understood he was the president. And our job was to bring the agenda to the president, not for the agenda to come from the president to himself. And his thing was, just like labor leaders come and women come on gender issues and climate change issues, y'all got to bring the issue to me. I may agree, but you can't expect me to lead the march on myself, Reverend.
To march on myself. So I think fast forward to now, I don't know if the roles that you just articulated, I don't know if the young generation of activists and a lot of the, I guess, social media activists that start a lot of conversations understand this dynamic that well.
I think that they will get there if they don't, if they want to get things done. What I say to a lot of young people in National Action Network, we have a young leader, 24 years old, Talik McMillan, and I do virtual classes with our chapter leaders, is you got to decide whether it is agenda or ego that you're after. If it's ego, you want hits on social media, you want likes, you want to build up your crowd. If it's agenda, you want to change legislation like we're marching about voting, like we did in the stop and frisk in New York or the Aragada choke law. So sometimes to get an agenda done, you might not get as much feedback hits on social media. Sometimes you will. And you've got to decide what's most important. The leaders that last the longest are the ones that put agenda over ego because their ego is connected to I got things done. I started National Action Network 30 years ago. I can tell you 1,000 groups that didn't, that started when we started or around in that are not there. I started Politics Nation on MSNBC 10 years ago. We just celebrated it this week.
Congrats.
So I'd rather be a long-distance runner than a sprinter that somebody says, 5 years from now, you remember that guy, Al? I said, no, I don't remember him. Your ego can be, in my opinion, have more gratification if your agenda changes things because people will remember that you did the work.
Reverend, I had a question for you. Eric Adams is probably going to end up being mayor of New York.
Right.
How do you feel about him and his views on police brutality and just overall?
I've known Eric a long time. Eric, when I started National Action Network 30 years ago, the attorney, Michael Hardy, said we need 5 people to sign incorporation papers. We had rallies every Saturday like we still have every Saturday morning. One of the 5 people that signed was a cop named Eric Adams. That's how long I've known him. Eric has always had a position of we've got to reform policing. He formed a group called 100 Blacks in Law Enforcement, and we've got to fight crime at the same time. And I think sometimes that we get caught between the debate of the slogans and the content. So you got people that say defund the police. Well, they don't mean take the money from policing. They mean to distribute it differently. Somewhere I think that Eric and the activist crowd will sit down and find common ground because as much as we are against what they did to George Floyd, and I was part of the leadership of that, 2 weeks after I did the funeral for George Floyd, I had to do a 1-year-old kid's funeral in Brooklyn, killed by a stray bullet that was killed in a gang fight. So we've got to deal with both police brutality and the violence we're doing to each other. It's not one or the other, it's both and. And I think Eric hitting that chord is what helped him win the Democratic nomination.
Now, where are we in the pendulum swing of, police being basically, in some ways, disrespectful and feeling like they're doing a favor for the city that they work for? Because it does feel like that sometimes, right? It feels like the ego of, and that's not all police, but just the ego of the totality of the unions and the people who speak on behalf of them feels like they're doing us a favor, right?
Yeah, it's arrogant.
It's the arrogance, right? And sometimes that's the piece. The lack of accountability, the arrogance. Somehow you think you're better than just the average everyday citizen, the way you talk, the way you deal with certain things. And I know they're under a lot of stress and whatever, but that's the job.
That's the job you sign up for. And people have the right to expect you to act like public service because that's
right.
what you are. And I would hope, and I think it will, as well as I know Eric, with a policeman being mayor, he can talk to them in a different kind of way than the previous mayors, saying, wait a minute, we can't walk around with this chip on our shoulder and can step to them. It's hard to call a guy that was a policeman anti-police. That's why Curtis Lee, with his Republican opponents, having a hard time selling that I'm against crime stuff on Eric. How you gonna do that when this guy was on the beat and you wasn't? So I think part of Eric's challenge is he's going to have to deal with those police unions and tell them, look, y'all got to stop this arrogance because you're hurting the cause of police. People are not anti-police. They're anti-police brutality, but they're also anti-being offended and insulted and treated in a disrespectful way. If you're going to pull my car over, you don't have to act like I'm just somebody that is automatically criminal and that you can push around. There's a way you do public service.
Gun violence in the city. You have been on the streets, whether it's National Night Out and Stop the Violence marches and all. You've been in the streets of New York since it was.
Right.
We had deaths in the thousands. A lot is made of gun violence in the city right now because it's higher than it was a couple years ago, but it's nowhere near 1988 numbers, 1987, even early 90s numbers. So when you're having the conversation now, it seems like it's a more precise, economic, certain communities, certain economic brackets conversation versus just all over the city. What's the conversation right now with gun violence and figuring out a solution to de-escalate?
The conversation is certainly dealing with those pockets that have it and dealing with how do we litigate gun manufacturers, gun distributors. Because the question is, how are the guns getting in? You can't shoot a gun that you don't have. So at the one level, you have people that are doing good work around youth violence and around talking to young people. But at the other level is that we have not really seen a real effort to bring about gun traffickers to have to pay the price in court. We've not seen that. When's the last time we've seen gun traffickers rolled into court en masse? Right. And that's what we've got to do. We've got to cut off the supply. And
do you feel like that's something that that politicians, people legislating, the Attorney General, I know she just went after the NRA and Tish James did all that.
Tish James has a background in fighting the manufacturers. I think her and this new governor, I'm meeting with her today, the new governor, need to really escalate. And I've talked to Biden about it. It needs to be done on a federal level. There is no gun manufacturing plants in Harlem or Bed-Stuy or Brownsville. So how is this getting in there? How can you find the gangs, but you can't find out who's supplying them with the guns?
Because, I have my theories. We've talked about it. I think it's an inside job.
Right.
It's an inside job.
Right.
And our communities, unfortunately, violence is a part of the fabric of this nation, unfortunately, and people sort to resolving their conflicts that way. You know what I mean?
And it has always been that way, but the reason it escalates it disproportionately in our community is the weapons are there.
That's
and
right.
It wouldn't be tolerated in other communities.
Speaking of Tish James and Cuomo and that whole thing, you and Cuomo were close. You saw this thing playing out. Have you had a conversation with Andrew Cuomo?
I had one when it first broke, then we didn't talk anymore. But I knew some of the people that made the accusations, so I wasn't getting in that.
Yeah.
I think Tish James, I've known her, all of our careers.
Right.
We come up in Brooklyn politics, and I think she was going to go where it brought her. What happens now with the gubernatorial race, people are saying, is she going to run? Is Jumaane Williams going to run? Is Swazi going to run? We'll see. I would hope that Hochul and Brian Benjamin, who she selected as lieutenant governor, who's been a member of National Action Network as long as I can remember. I hope they first bring the city back together, the state back together. We have a COVID crisis. We have a crisis in terms of bringing small businesses back, and we let the politics take care of itself later this year and going into next year.
The march it's this Saturday.
This Saturday, day after tomorrow.
If you want to get involved down there in D.C., you can reach out to the National Action Network. What's the number again?
www.nationalactionnetwork.net or 1-877-626-4651.
And before we wrap, any words for young activists? Because it is I don't know how you feel, but me as somebody that's been having these conversations, we've had our back and forth throughout the year, but we've been having these conversations before it was cool.
Right.
And now it's in vogue,
Yep.
right? It's a lot of youth and people want to get active, whether local, national, whatever. That's great.
But what I say to young activists, first of all, know what it is you are trying to achieve. You can't arrive without a destination. What is the march for? What is the gathering for? And don't just be clout chasing. Be really understanding that people need work. People need things done. And don't make all of your thing on that you a young activist because you're getting older every day. Every morning you wake up, you're getting older. There's somebody younger than you. I look at some of the young activists today and I tell them, you ain't 20 no more. You in your 40s. You ain't young. You got grown kids. So let's quit playing the youth card and let's play what we get done card.
It is. The Reverend Al Sharpton, thank you for your time today,
Thank
sir.
you,
Thank you
sir.
so much.
Thanks, Reverend Al.
Great
All right,
seeing you.
peace.
Yes, sir.